Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we're diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the Secret Doctrine with Part 2, Stanza 7. From the semi-divine down to the first human races. 24. The sons of wisdom, the sons of night, issued from the body of Brahma when it became night. That is self-contradictory, right? We have been told several times that when it is the night of Brahma, there is literally nothing, and so there can't be any sons if, when it becomes night, everything disappears. Ready for rebirth, came down, they saw thee, intellectually, vile forms of the first third, still senseless race. We can choose, said the lords, we have wisdom. Some entered the Kakayas, some projected a spark, some deferred till the fourth race. From their own essence they filled, intensified, the Kama, the vehicle of desire. Those who received but a spark remained destitute of higher knowledge. The spark burnt low. B. The third remained mindless. Their yivas, monads, were not ready. These were set apart among the 7 primitive human species. They became the narrow-headed. The third were ready. In these shall we dwell, said the Lord of the flame and of the dark wisdom. See. This stanza contains, in itself, the whole key to the mysteries of evil, the so-called fall of the angels, and the many problems that have puzzled the brains of the philosophers from that time that the memory of man began. It solves the secret of the subsequent inequalities of intellectual capacity, of birth or social position, and gives a logical explanation to the incomprehensible karmic course throughout the eons which followed. The best explanation which can be given, in view of the difficulties of the subject, shall now be attempted. Okay, it does not solve anything, right? People have, still today, inequalities of intellectual capacity. There are some people that are born with a greater understanding of things and some that are born without the ability to understand those things. Birth or social position. We still today have people who believe they are born in a lower social position, but in the modern era, that's really not a thing in the civilized world. I understand that in India they still have the caste system, but that does not count as the civilized world. And this is not, this is an explanation. Yes, this is somebody coming up with something to explain a thing. Yes, but that does not mean that it is solved at all. It does not mean that it is an explanation of the incomprehensible karmic course. Karma is not incomprehensible. It is quite literally cause-react, right? Literally how physics works. And so I don't agree with this at all. Now, I don't believe this, right? I don't believe the Bible and the Genesis story was the full and complete creation story. I do not believe that these stanzas in the book of Dizan are either, right? These are merely some people speculating about how this could possibly have come to be. That is all that any of this is. Some of it may be accurate, some of it I may even believe, but most of it is speculation prima facie, right? Right off the top, most of this is purely speculation. This being definitely part of that. Up to the fourth round, and even to the later part of the third race in this round, man, if the ever-changing forms that clothe the monads during the first 3 rounds and the first 2.5 races of the present one can be given that misleading name, is, so far, only an animal intellectually. It is only in the actual midway round that he develops in himself entirely the fourth principle as a fit vehicle for the fifth. But Manas will be relatively fully developed only in the following rounds, when it will have an opportunity of becoming entirely divine until the end of the rounds. As Christian Shotogan says in Hore Hebraic, etc., the first terrestrial Adam had only the breath of life, nefesh, but not the living soul. B. Here, the inferior races, of which there are still some analogues left, as the Australians, now fast dying out, and some African and Oceanic tribes, are meant. They were not ready signifies the karmic development of these monads had not yet fitted them to occupy the forms of men destined for incarnation in higher intellectual races. But this is explained later on. This is a wild statement, right? We have the lens of history to look back on. This was 1888. It was very shortly after the American Civil War and the end of slavery being an institution. So it's not entirely surprising that there are some of these less than desirable opinions about people, right? Just because somebody was born without the current level of understanding that you have doesn't make them inferior. If they are living a primitive lifestyle in wherever they happen to be, it doesn't mean that they are incapable of understanding things. It just means that they have not had these things to try to understand. That is still true today, right? I just talked about India being uncivilized. That is because of the way that they live, right? It's not because of their religious doctrines, right? Well, not entirely anyway. It is because of the way that they actively engage in civilization, right? There's shit all over the place, and they dunk themselves in the Ganges every year, and the Ganges is disgusting, right? That is not a civilized behavior. They have understanding. These tribes that were out in the middle of the ocean, completely isolated from all civilization, they didn't have any chance to understand anything, right? We know about sanitation problems. Still, today, we have people actively engaging in sanitation issues, despite the fact that we have better knowledge. That is uncivilized, right? The people living on the oceanic tribes probably didn't have to deal with feces in their water. And so, like most of this, these are things that people use to explain how they feel superior to somebody or how they feel inferior to other people. And they use these excuses. And yes, this is an excuse. Well, they're an inferior race. They're not as good as us. That is ridiculous to me. Just because you didn't have the opportunity to learn it does not mean that you can't learn it. C. The Zohar speaks of black fire, which is absolute light wisdom. To those who, prompted by old theological prejudice, may say, but the Asuras are the rebel devas, the opponents of the gods, hence devils, and the spirits of evil. It is answered. Esoteric philosophy admits neither good nor evil per se as existing independently of nature. The cause for both is found, as regards the cosmos, in the necessity of contraries or contrast, and, with respect to man, in his human nature, is ignorance and passions. There is no devil, or the utterly depraved, as there are no angels, absolutely perfect, though there may be spirits of light and darkness. Thus, Lucifer, the spirit of intellectual enlightenment and freedom of thought, is metaphorically the guiding beacon which helps man to find his way through the rocks and sandbanks of life. For Lucifer is the Logos in his highest, and the adversary in his lowest aspect, both of which are reflected in our ego. Lactantius, speaking of the nature of Christ, makes the Logos the Word, the firstborn brother of Satan, the first of all creatures. Now, the way that I put this, right, I don't believe that there is good and evil. Not in the intrinsic way that is intimated here, right? This being that does nothing but evil. Because evil is a relative term. There are things which you are here to learn, and some of those require people to act in a less than ideal manner. That doesn't make them evil. If Satan were to exist, which I'm not convinced of by any means, it can be the spirit of learning and freedom of thought and intellectual enlightenment. That's fine, right? Whatever name you want to call that particular thing. But to me, these are entities, right? Entities occupy, like we're an entity, you are a human entity. My dogs are a canine entity. The entities which are above us in the spiritual evolution way, right? They have purposes just as much as we do and just as much as the other animals do. I don't have a full understanding of that, but on every single plane of existence, there are those which are aligned with the betterment of humanity and those which are aligned with the detriment of humanity. What do you mean? Well, we have radioactive elements. They do not act in the best spirit for human beings in uncontrolled environments, right? We have plants that if you eat them, they will kill you. Not aligned with the betterment of humanity, but instead with the detriment. You learn a lesson by eating this plant. That lesson is not to eat this plant, it will kill you. There are animals of various types that are not aligned with the betterment of humanity. They are out there doing their own thing. We have some that are aligned with us, right? Our dogs and our cats, they're aligned with us. Lions, a little bit less so. Humans, same thing. People are aligned with the betterment and detriment. It's the same for the entities. The detriment does not necessarily mean evil. It means what you need to be able to grow, right? A plant growing in your yard may see that the rain is a detriment. It is getting flooded out, but then the water goes down a little bit and it uses that water to build itself up. It has become stronger. In a period where there is less rainfall, that exact same plant will find that to be to its detriment, even though not having the rain makes the roots seek out and get stronger. Just because something is aligned in a way that you consider detrimental doesn't necessarily mean it's detrimental, but some things are. And even if it is aligned in a detrimental way, that does not make it evil. That means that you have something to learn from that. It may be to overcome it. It may be to not. Some people don't learn the lesson to not eat these berries. The intrinsic evil would be murder for just murder. Like, we have plenty of humans that do that, right? They get off on it. That is evil, right? If you are aligned, totally depraved, that is a real thing. I have met some of these people. I mean, most people go their entire lives without understanding that there are truly evil people in the world. There are truly beneficent people in the world too. It is a balance. They're here serving a purpose. You're here serving a purpose. Everybody's here for a purpose. That purpose, sometimes it's wonderful. Sometimes it's terrible. The purpose is still there. Neither one of those are positive or negative. It's just a relative term that we use for ourselves. Back to the text. The Vishnu Purana describes these primeval creatures, the Arvaksrota, with crooked digestive canals. They were endowed with inward manifestations, but mutually in ignorance about their kind and nature. The 28 kinds of Badha, or imperfections, do not apply, as Wilson thought, to the animals now known and specified by him. See Book 1, Chapter 71, or Chapter 5, page 71. Specified by him, for these did not exist in those geological periods. This is quite plain in the said work, in which the first created on this globe are the fivefold immovable creation, minerals and vegetables. Then come those fabulous animals. Tiriaxrota, the monsters of the abyss, slain by the lords. See stanzas 2 and 3. Then the Erdhwasrotas, the happy celestial beings, which feed on ambrosia. Then, lastly, the Arvaxrotas, human beings. Brahma's seventh creation, so-called. But these creations, including the latter, did not occur on this globe. Wherever else they may have taken place, it is not Brahma who creates things and men on this earth, but the chief and lord of the Prajapati, the lords of being and terrestrial creation. Footnote: Vishnu Purana, Book 1, Chapter 15 of Volume 2. Obeying the command of Brahma, Daksha, the synthesis, or the aggregate, of the terrestrial creators and progenitors, Pitras included, made superior and inferior, Vara and Avara, things, referring to Putra, progeny, and bipeds and quadrupeds, and subsequently by his will, the sons of will and yoga, made females. In example, separated the androgenes. Here again we have bipeds, or men, created before the quadrupeds, as in the esoteric teachings. Vide Supra and stanza 12. Since, in the exoteric accounts, the Asuras are the first beings created from the body of night, while the Pitras issued from that of twilight, the gods being placed by Parasara, Vishnu Purana, between the two and shown to evolve from the body of the day, it is easy to discover a determined purpose to veil the order of creation. Man is the Arvak Shrota, coming from the body of the dawn, and elsewhere. Man is again referred to when the creator of the world, Brahma, is shown creating fierce-beating beings denominated bhutas and eaters of flesh, or, as the text has it, fiends frightful from being monkey-colored and carnivorous. That footnote is just a reference. We're not going to hit it. Whereas the Rakshasas are generally translated by evil spirits and the enemies of the gods, which identifies them with the Asuras. In the Ramayana, when Hanuman is reconnoitering the enemy in Lanka, he finds there Rakshasas, some hideous, while some were beautiful to look upon. And in Vishnu Purana there is a direct reference to their becoming the saviors of humanity, or of Brahma. The allegory is very ingenious. Great intellect and too much knowledge are a two-edged weapon in life, and instruments for evil as well as for good. When combined with selfishness, they will make the whole of humanity a footstool for the elevation of him who possesses them, and a means for the attainment of his objects. While applied to altruistic humanitarian purposes, they may become the means of the salvation of many. At all events, the absence of the self-consciousness and intellect will make of man an idiot, a brute in human form. Brahma is Mahat, the universal mind, hence the too selfish among the Rakshasas, showing the desire to become possessed of it all, to devour Mahat. The allegory is transparent. At any rate, esoteric philosophy identifies the pre-Brahmanical Asuras, Rudras, footnote, whom Manu calls apaternal grandfathers. The Rudras are the seven manifestations of Rudra Siva, the destroying god, and also the grand yogi and ascetic. Asuras, Rudras, Rakshasas, and all of the adversaries of the gods and the allegories with the egos, which, by incarnating in the still witless man of the third race, made him consciously immortal. They are, then, during the cycle of incarnations, the true dual logos. the conflicting and two-faced divine principle in man. The commentary that follows and the next stanzas may, no doubt, throw more light on this very difficult tenet, but the writer does not feel competent to give it out fully. Of the succession of races, however, they say, first come the self-existent on this earth. They are the spiritual lives projected by the absolute will and law at the dawn of every rebirth of the worlds. These lives are the divine Shishta, the seed manus, or the Prajapati, and the Pitras. From these proceed the first race, the self-born, which are the astral shadows of their progenitors. That footnote is a reference. The body was devoid of all understanding, mind, intelligence, and will. The inner being, the higher self or monad, though within the earthly frame, was unconnected with it. The link, the manas, was not there as yet. 2. From the first race emanated the second, called the sweat-born. Footnote 3. To speak of life as having arisen, and of the human race as having originated, in this absurdly unscientific way in the face of the modern pedigrees of man, is to court instantaneous annihilation. The esoteric doctrine risks the danger, nevertheless, and even goes so far as to act the impartial reader, to compare the above hypotheses, if it is one, with Haeckel's theory, now fast becoming an axiom with science, which is quoted verbatim. How did life, the living world of organisms, arise? And secondly, the special question, how did the human race originate? The first of these two inquiries, that as to the first appearance of living beings, can only be decided empirically, by proof of the so-called archebiosis, or equivocal generation, or the spontaneous production of organisms of the simplest conceivable kind. Such are the Monera, protogenes, protoamoeba, etc. Exceedingly simple microscopic masses of protoplasm without structure or organization, which take in nutriment and reproduce themselves by division. Such a moneron as that primordial organism discovered by the renowned English zoologist Huxley, and named Bathybius haeckelii, appears as a continuous, thick, protoplasmic covering at the greatest depths of the ocean, between 3,000 and 30,000 feet. It is true that the first appearance of such Monera has not up to the present moment been actually observed, but there is nothing intrinsically improbable in such an evolution. The Bathybius protoplasm having recently turned out to be no organic substance at all, there remains little to be said. Nor, after reading this, does one need to consume further time in refuting the further assertion that, in the case of man, also, has beyond a doubt, to the minds of Haeckel and his like, arisen from the lower mammalia, apes, and the earliest simian creatures, the still earlier marsupialia, amphibia, Pisces, by progressive transformations, all produced by a series of natural forces working blindly, aim without design. The above-quoted passage bears its criticism on its own face. Science is made to teach that which, up to the present time, has never been actually observed. She is made to deny the phenomena of an intelligent nature and a vital force independent of form and matter, and to find it more scientific to teach the miraculous performance of natural forces working blindly without aim or design. If so, then we are led to think that the physico-mechanical forces of the brains of certain eminent scientists are leading them on as blindly to sacrifice logic and common sense on the altar of mutual admiration. Why should the protoplasmic moneron, producing the first living creature through self-division, be held as a very scientific hypothesis, and an ethereal, pre-human race generating the primeval men in the same fashion be tabooed as unscientific? superstition? Or has materialism obtained a sole monopoly in science? From the first race emanated the second, called the sweat-born, and the boneless. This is the second rude race endowed by the preservers, Rakshasas. Footnote. The Rakshasas, regarded in Indian popular theology as demons, are called the preservers beyond the Himalayas. This double and contradictory meaning has its origin in a philosophical allegory, which is variously rendered in the Puranas. It is stated that when Brahma created the demons, Yakshas from yaksh, to eat, and the Rakshasas, both of which kinds of demon, as soon as born, wished to devour their creator, those among them that called out, "Not so, oh let him be saved," preserved, were named Rakshasas. Vishnu Purana, Book 1, Chapter 5. The Bhagavata Purana 3:20, 1921 renders the allegory differently. Brahma transformed himself into night, or ignorance, invested with a body upon which the Yakshas and Rakshasas ceased, exclaiming, "Do not spare it, devour it." Brahma then cried out, "Do not devour me, spare me." This has an inner meaning, of course. The body of night is the darkness of ignorance, and it is the darkness of silence and secrecy. Now the Rakshasas are shown in almost every case to be yogis, pious sadhus and initiates, a rather unusual occupation for demons. The meaning, then, is that while we have power to dispel the darkness of ignorance, devour it, we have to preserve the sacred truth from profanation. Brahma is for the Brahmins alone, says that proud caste. The moral of the fable is evident. This is the second root race, endowed by the preservers, Rakshasas, and the incarnating gods, Asuras and Kumaras, with the first primitive and weak spark, the germ of intelligence, and from these, in turn, proceeds. 3. The third root race, the twofold, androgynes. The first races hereof are shells, till the last is inhabited, an example, informed by the Dhyanis. The second race, as stated above, being also sexless, evolved out of itself at its beginning, the third androgyne race, by an analogous but already more complicated process. As described in the commentary, the very earliest of that race were the sons of passive yoga. Footnote. The gradual evolution of man in the secret doctrine shows that all the later, to the profane the earliest races, had their physical origin in the early fourth race. But it is the sub-race, which preceded the one that separated sexually, that is to be regarded as the spiritual ancestors of our present generations, and especially of the Eastern Aryan races. Weber's idea that the Indo-Germanic race preceded the Aryan Vedic race is, to the occultist, grotesque to the last degree. Where are we at? The sons of passive yoga, they issued from the second Manushayas, human race, and became aviparas. The emanations that came out of their bodies during the seasons of procreation were ovulatory, the small spheroidal nuclei developing in a large, soft, egg-like vehicle, gradually hardened when, after a period of gestation, it broke, and the young human animal issued from it unaided, as the fowls do in our race. This must seem to the reader ludicrously absurd. Nevertheless, it is strictly on the lines of evolutionary analogy, which science perceives in the development of the living animal species. First, the monoron-like procreation by self-division, vide Haeckel. Then, after a few stages, the oviparous, as in the case of the reptiles, which are followed by the birds. Then, finally, the mammals, with their ovoviviparous modes of producing their young ones. If the term ovoviviparous is applied to some fish and reptiles, which hatch their eggs within their bodies, why should it not be applied to female mammalians, including women? The ovule, in which, after impregnation, the development of the fetus takes place, is an egg. At all events, this conception is more philosophical than that of Eve, with a suddenly created placenta giving birth to Cain, because of the apple, when even the marsupial, the earliest of the mammals, is not placental yet. Okay, there is a lot right there. Conception is more philosophical than that of Eve, with a suddenly created placenta giving birth to Cain. Where is that in the Bible? Where is that? It says that she gave birth, but it does not say that there was a suddenly created placenta giving birth to Cain, right? Now, you can intimate that there was no sexual intercourse in the garden. Fine. But this being blamed on the apple, right? That would be blamed on God. Now you're going to procreate. It's not because you ate the apple. It's because God decided that you eating the apple that he put in the garden right next to you with no understanding of good and evil, right? You don't know that this is good and this is evil. You have instructions, but you don't know that breaking those instructions are evil, right? And so you eat the apple. The apple doesn't create the birth thing. That is the kicking it out of Eden. And God saying, okay, now you're going to have to carry the child, right? So that's a little bit off the wall. But then the marsupial, the earliest of mammals, is not a placental yet. That statement in its entirety is not necessarily correct, right? We do not know that the marsupial was the earliest of the mammals. As far as I am aware, I can be wrong, but the fossil records do indicate that there were some mammalians, at least contemporaneous with marsupials, not necessarily one before the other. As far as I'm aware, and I'm not extremely well read on that, but I do have a little bit of knowledge about most things. Back to the text. Moreover, the progressive order of the methods of reproduction, as unveiled by science, is a brilliant confirmation of esoteric ethnology. It is only necessary to tabulate the data in order to prove our assertion. Especially Schmidt's Doctrine of Descent and Darwinism, and Lang's A Modern Zoroastrian. 1. Fission. As seen in the division of the homogeneous speck of protoplasm known as moneron or amoeba into two. B. As seen in the division of the nucleated cell, in which the cell nucleus splits into two subnuclei, which either develop within the original cell wall or burst it, and multiply outside as independent entities. 2. Budding. A small portion of the parent structure swells out at the surface and finally parts company, growing to the size of the original organism, e.g. many vegetables, the sea anemone, etc. See the second root race, and that is a footnote. Every process of healing and cicatrization in the higher animal groups, even in the case of reproduction of mutilated limbs with the amphibians, is affected by fission and gemmation of the elementary morphological elements. 3. Spores. A single cell thrown off by the parent organism, which develops into a multicellular organism, reproducing the features of the latter, e.g., bacteria and mosses. 4. Intermediate hermaphroditism. Male and female organs inhering in the same individual, e.g., the majority of plants, worms, and snails, etc., allied to budding. All right, so it is true that worms, now, I don't know about snails. I definitely know not the majority of plants. But worms do reproduce. They contain both of the sex organs, that is true, but they do not self-reproduce through those organs, right? There is a whole process by which earthworms, compost worms, whatever you're dealing with, kind of slide through each other and impregnate each other. It's a really weird process, and I only know about it because I grew red wigglers for a while. And so it is definitely something to check out, but it is not self-determining hermaphroditism. I'm not even sure that you can really classify it as hermaphroditism because of the way that it works, but we'll go ahead and let that slide, right? Snails, I have absolutely no reference on how they reproduce. I've never looked that up at all. The majority of plants, however, you can make the argument that there are some plants which contain both, but the majority of plants is going to be a hard sell for me, right? Most of the plants, if you walk out into your yard right now, most of those, if they reproduce in a sexual manner, do so through male and female plants. That doesn't mean that there are not some that don't, right? Tomatoes are hermaphroditic, right? They can self-pollinate. But most other plants can, right? Cannabis can't, pine trees can't, even oak trees have male and female. So, yeah. 5. True sexual union. Can y'all hear the thunder? It's about to get really rainy here. I'm hoping I can make it through this. We now come to an important point with regard to the double evolution of the human race. The sons of wisdom, or the spiritual Dhyanis, had become intellectual through their contact with matter because they had already reached, during previous cycles of incarnation, that degree of intellect which enabled them to become independent and self-conscious entities on this plane of matter. They were reborn only by reason of karmic effects. They entered those who were ready and became the arhats or sages alluded to above. This needs explanation. It does not mean that the monads entered forms in which other monads already were. They were essences, intelligences, and conscious spirits. Entities seeking to become still more conscious by uniting with more developed matter. Their essence was too pure to be distinct from the universal essence, but their egos, or manas, since they are called manasaputra, born of Mahat or Brahma, had to pass through earthly human experiences to become all-wise, to be able to start on the returning, ascending cycle. The monads are not discrete principles, limited or conditioned, but rays from that one universal, absolute principle. The entrance into a dark room through the same aperture of one ray of sunlight following another will not constitute two rays, but one ray intensified. It is not in the course of natural law that man should become a perfect septenary being before the seventh race in the seventh round. Yet he has all these principles latent in him from his birth. Nor is it part of the evolutionary law that the fifth principle, manas, should receive its complete development before the fifth round. All such prematurely developed intellects on the spiritual plane in our race are abnormal. They are those whom we call the fifth rounders. Even in the coming seventh race, at the close of this fourth round, while our four lower principles will be fully developed, that of manas will be only proportionately so. This limitation, however, refers solely to the spiritual development. the intellectual on the physical plane, was reached during the fourth root race. Thus, those who were half ready, who received but a spark, constitute the average humanity which has to acquire its intellectuality during the present manvanteric evolution, after which they will be ready in the next for the full reception of the sons of wisdom, while those which were not ready at all, the latest monads, which had hardly evolved from their last transitional and lower animal forms at the close of the third round, remained the narrow-brained of the stanza. This explains the otherwise unaccountable degrees of intellectuality among the various races of men, the savage Bushman and the European, even now. Those tribes of savages whose reasoning powers are very little above the level of the animals are not the unjustly disinherited or the unfavored, as some may think. Nothing of the kind. They are simply those latest arrivals among the human monads, which were not ready, which have to evolve during the present round, as on the 3 remaining globes, hence on 4 different planes of being, so as to arrive at the level of the average class when they reach the 5th round. One remark may prove useful as food for thought to the student in this connection. The monads of the lowest specimens of humanity, the narrow-brained, footnote. The term here means neither the dolichocephalic nor the brachiocephalic, nor yet skulls of a smaller volume, but simply brains, devoid of intellect generally. The theory which would judge of the intellectual capacity of man according to his cranial capacity seems absurdly illogical to one who has studied the subject. The skulls of the Stone Period, as well as those of the African races, Bushmen included, show that the first are above rather than below the average of the brain capacity of the modern man, and the skulls of the last are on the whole, as in the case of the Papuans and the Polynesians generally, larger by 1 cubic inch than that of the average Frenchman. Again, the cranial capacity of the Parisian of today represents an average of 1,437 cubic centimeters, compared to 1523 of the Auvergnat. The narrow-brained, savage South Sea Islander, the African, the Australian, had no karma to work out when first born as men, as their more favored brethren in intelligence had. The former are spinning out of karma only now. The latter are burdened with past, present, and future karma. In this respect, the poor savage is more fortunate than the greatest genius of civilized countries. All right. I've already hit it once, but we're going to hit it again in a way that I do all of the time. The problem with prophecy, right, you can only understand according to the knowledge which you already possess, is a good explanatory for this, right? The example that I use all of the time. If you were to go back in history with a time travel device and snatch up Isaiah, yes, the Isaiah from the Bible who makes all of the prophecies, he lived 4,000 years ago, or something like that, 3,500. If I was to grab him with this time machine and bring him right here and sit him in a chair right next to me, he could not describe almost anything contained in this room, right? He couldn't talk about this camera. He couldn't talk about this microphone. He couldn't talk about these TV monitors. He couldn't talk about these lights. He couldn't talk about the mirror on the wall. Right? None of those things were existent in his life. He could talk about glowing rocks. He could talk about his understanding of these things, but he could not understand what they were. But if you gave me a year and the language thing was not a problem, I could train him on what exactly every single bit of this was and even how to use it. It's not that he doesn't have the capacity to learn, it's that he doesn't have the experience to draw upon. That is a major issue with prophecy, right? If Isaiah was here, he would not be able to explain this. He would talk about wheels on wheels and glowing rocks and things of that nature. He wouldn't be able to understand it according to his knowledge. It is the same with these savage people. And you can take any one of them and bring them and train them to understand things. They just didn't have the opportunity prior to. And so I'm hitting it again because to me, it is absolutely ridiculous to base any judgments whatsoever based upon melanin levels, based upon genitalia, right? These are arbitrary and really have no determination whatsoever in who you are intrinsically. And so this really just irks me, right? Even as much as most of the other, like yesterday, we had a whole lot of irking going on, or in the last video. This irks me just as much as any of the other stuff, right? Misrepresenting what is said deliberately. Like, I don't hold the Bible as the reference that most people do, but if you are going to quote it, you should quote it accurately. That's a problem for me. I got quite spun up about it in the last video. It's the same thing here. You're hammering on something which is simply not a true thing. And it's annoying. Back to the text. Let us pause before giving any more such strange teachings. Let us try and find out how far any ancient scriptures, and even science, permit the possibility of, or even distinctly corroborate, such wild notions as are found in our anthropogenesis. Recapitulating that which has been said, we find that the secret doctrine claims for man, 1, a polygenetic origin, 2, a variety of modes of procreation before humanity fell into the ordinary method of generation, 3, that the evolution of animals, of the mammalians at any rate, follows that of man instead of preceding it. That is patently untrue. And this is diametrically opposed to the now generally accepted theories of evolution and the descent of man from an animal ancestor. Now, I hold some unconventional beliefs. One of those is that macroevolution does not work. The changing from one species into another through natural selection doesn't work for a variety of reasons which we have expounded upon many times. And so, off the top, you've already got problems. Right? A polygenetic origin, I believe that. There were probably, at the time of mutation, many mutations happening at the same time. That would be polygenetics, more than one gene. A variety of modes of procreation, however, I do not fall into. Right? I don't believe that we were formed unaided from amoeba all the way up to where we are now. Again, macroevolution does not work in the way that it would have to for that. There has to be some kind of influence. It does not have to be intelligent influence. It can be random mutations caused by electromagnetic radiation. That is entirely possible. But just one day randomly, this amoeba turns into a fish is never going to happen, right? Not through natural mating circumstances. Random genetic mutations is never going to allow that to happen. Third, we know beyond the shadow of a doubt, with zero problems, that mammals are existent even in the time of the Pleistocene, right, which is before us, right, before the last ice age. We have, at the best, right now, in human capacity, we have just found 30,000-year-old remains of a pit. These are some of the oldest human civilization remains that we have ever found. There are people buried in this pit, and there are mammals buried in this pit. These are the oldest existent fossil records of humans that we have, and mammals are contemporaneous with them. We have fossil remains of mammals much older than we have any fossil remains of humans. There is, however, if you didn't know, they have found a flute carved from a mammal bone that is 50,000 years old according to their dating procedures. Now, whether that is a true number or not, Still highly up for debate, but there's a good reason to believe that it is 50,000 years old, which, if true, this remarkably well created flute made from mammalian bone puts humanity's capacity for some things severely older than we thought that it would be. All right, back to the text. Let us, by giving to Caesar what is Caesar's, examine, first of all, the chances for the polygenetic theory among the men of science. Now, the majority of the Darwinian evolutionists incline to a polygenetic explanation of the origin of races. On this particular question, however, scientists are, as in many other cases, at sixes and sevens. They agree to disagree. Does man descend from a single couple or from several groups, monogenicism or polygenism? As far as one can venture to pronounce on what in the absence of witnesses will never be known, the second hypothesis is far the most probable. Footnote. Lefebvre Philosophy. Abel Havelock, in his Science of Language, comes to a similar conclusion, arguing from the evidence available to a linguistic inquirer. I have made my argument several times. I am not going to do it here. In an address delivered to the British Association, Professor W.H. Flower remarked on this question, "The view which appears best to accord with what is known of the characters and distribution of the races of man is a modification of the monogenistic hypotheses. Without entering into the difficult question of the method of man's first appearance upon the world, we must assume for it a vast antiquity, at all events as measured by any historical standard. If we had any approach to a complete paleontological record, the history of man could be reconstructed, but nothing of the kind is forthcoming. Such an admission must be regarded as fatal to the dogmatism of physical evolutionists, and as opening a wide margin to occult speculations. The opponents of the Darwinian theory were, and still remain, polygenicists. Such intellectual giants as John Crawford and James Hunt discussed the problem and favored polygenesis. And in their day, there was a far stronger feeling in favor of than against this theory. It is only in 1864 that Darwinians began to be wedded to the theory of unity, of which Messrs. Huxley and Lubbock became the first codify. As regards that other question, of the priority of man to the animals in the order of evolution, the answer is as promptly given. If man is really the microcosm of the macrocosm, then the teaching has nothing so very impossible in it, and is but logical. For man becomes that macrocosm for the three lower kingdoms under him. Arguing from a physical standpoint, all the lower kingdoms, save the mineral, which is light itself, crystallized and immetallized, from plants to the creatures which proceeded from the first mammalians, all have been consolidated in their physical structures by means of the cast-off dust of those minerals and the refuse of the human matter, whether from living or dead bodies, on which they fed and which gave them their outer bodies. In his turn, man grew more physical by reabsorbing into his system that which he had given out, and which had become transformed in the living animal crucibles through which it had passed, owing to nature's alchemical transmutations. There were animals in those days of which our modern naturalists have never dreamed, and the stronger became physical material man, the giants of those times, the more powerful were his emanations. Once that androgyne humanity, separated into sexes, transformed by nature into childbearing engines, It ceased to procreate its like through drops of vital energy oozing out of the body. But while man was still ignorant of his procreative powers on the human plane before his fall, as a believer in Adam would say, all this vital energy, scattered far and wide from him, was used by nature for the production of the first mammal animal forms. Evolution is an eternal cycle of becoming, we are taught, and nature never leaves an atom unused. Moreover, from the beginning of the round, all in nature tends to become man. All the impulses of the dual, centripetal, and centrifugal forces are directed towards one point, man. That is self-insertion. That is not necessarily true. That is something that you assume to be true because of your biases, because you are, indeed, a human. The progress in the succession of beings, says Agassiz, consists in an increasing similarity of the living fauna, and among the vertebrates, especially, in the increasing resemblance to man. Man is the end towards which all animal creation has tended from the first appearance of the first Paleozoic fishes. Footnote. Principles of Zoology, page 206. Just so, but the Paleozoic fishes, being at the lower curve of the arc of the evolution of forms, this round began with astral man, the reflection of Dian Kohans called the builders. Man is the alpha and the omega of objective creation. As said in Isis Unveiled, which we have done in its entirety, all things have their origin in spirit, evolution having originally begun from above and proceeding downwards, instead of the reverse as taught in the Darwinian theory. Footnote 2. Volume 1, page 154. Therefore, the tendency spoken of by the eminent naturalist above quoted is one inherent in every atom. Only, were one to apply it to both sides of the evolution, the observations made would greatly interfere with the modern theory which has now, almost, become Darwinian law. But, in citing the passage from Agassiz's work with approval, it must not be understood that the occultists are making any concession to the theory, which derives man from the animal kingdom. The fact that in this round he preceded the mammalia is obviously not impugned by the consideration of the later mammalia follow in the wake of man. 25. How did the Manasa, the sons of wisdom, act? They rejected the soft-born, the boneless. They are not ready. They spurned the first sweat-born. Footnote. This is explained in the section which follows this series of stanzas in the allegory from the Puranas concerning Kandu, the holy sage, and Pramloka, the nymph alleged to have hypnotized him. A suggestive allegory, scientifically, as the drops of perspiration which she exuded are the symbols of the spores of science. They are not quite ready. They would not enter the first egg-born. Footnote 2. This will be explained as we proceed. The unwillingness to fashion men, or create, is symbolized in the Puranas by Daksha having to deal with his opponent, Narada, the strife-making ascetic. To a theist or a Christian, this verse would suggest a rather theological idea, that of the fall of the angels through pride. In the secret doctrine, however, the reasons for the refusal to incarnate in half-ready physical bodies seems to be more connected with physiological than metaphysical reasons. Not all the organisms were sufficiently ready. The incarnating powers had to choose the ripest fruits and spurn the rest. That footnote is just a reference. By a curious coincidence, when selecting a familiar name for the continent on which the first androgenes, the third root race, separated, The writer chose, on geographical considerations, that of Lemuria, invented by Mr. P.L. Schlater. It is only later that, reading Haeckel's Pedigree of Man, it was found that the German animalist had chosen the name for his late continent. He traces, properly enough, the center of human evolution to Lemuria, but with a slight scientific variation. Speaking of it as that cradle of mankind, he pictures the gradual transformation of the anthropoid mammal into the primeval savage. Vogt, again, holds that in America, man sprang from a branch of the Platyrrhini apes, independently of the origination in the African and Asian rootstocks from the Old World Catarrhinians. Anthropologists are, as usual, at loggerheads on this question, as on many others. We shall examine this claim in the light of the esoteric philosophy in stanza 8. Meanwhile, let us give a few moments of attention to the various consecutive modes of procreation according to the laws of evolution. Now, I believe that Lemuria and Atlantis were coincident. They were two separate areas of the globe, but they exist at the same time in a repeated pattern of raising and lowering. These continents raise and lower. We've dealt with that many times in this study, so I'm not going to hit it again because it's already going to be a long one. Let us begin by the mode of reproduction of the later subraces of the third human race by those who found themselves endowed with the sacred fire from the spark of higher and independent beings who were the psychic and spiritual parents of man, as the lower Pitardevata, the Pitris, were the progenitors of his physical body. That third and holy race consisted of men who, at their zenith, were described as towering giants of godly strength and beauty, and the depositories of all the mysteries of heaven and earth. Had they likewise fallen, if, then, incarnation was the fall? Of this, presently. The only thing now to be noted of these is that the chief gods and heroes of the fourth and fifth races, as of later antiquity, are the deified images of these men of the third. The days of their physiological purity and those of their so-called fall have equally survived in the hearts and memories of their descendants. Hence, the dual natures shown in those gods, both virtue and sin, being exalted to their highest degree. In the biographies composed by posterity, they were the pre-Adamite and the divine races, which even theology, in whose sight they are all the accursed Cainite races, now begins to busy itself. But the action of spiritual progenitors of that race has first to be disposed of. A very difficult and abstruse point has to be explained with regards to stanzas 26 and 27. These say, 26. When the sweat bond produced the egg bond, the twofold, androgyne third race, footnote. The evolutionist Professor Schmidt alludes to the fact of the separation of sexes as to the derivation of which from species, once hermaphrodite, all, the believers in creation naturally accepted, are assuredly of one accord. Such, indeed, is the incontestable evidence drawn from the presence of rudimentary organs. His Doctrine of Descent and Darwinism. Apart from such palpable traces of a primeval hermaphroditism, the fact may be noted that, as Lang writes, a study of embryology shows that in the human higher animal species, the distinction of sex is not developed until a considerable progress has been made in the growth of the embryo. That is patently untrue. The law of retardation, operative alike in the case of human races, animal species, etc., when a higher type has once been evolved, still preserves hermaphroditism as the reproductive method of the majority of plants and many lower animals. Now, when I said that that is patently untrue, it is patently untrue because you can take a DNA sample from an embryo and decide whether it is going to be male or female. That is incontestable science. If you go through IVF and they fertilize several of the eggs, you can decide which one you keep based upon the sex. And so just because the outward genitalia are not visible for a while does not mean that the determination has not been already carried out. Back to the text. The mighty, the powerful with bones, the laws of wisdom said, "Now shall we create?" Why now and not earlier? This the following sloka explains. 27. Then the third race became the Vahan, vehicle, of the Lords of Wisdom. It created sons of will and yoga by Kriya Sakti. It created them, the Holy Fathers, ancestors of the Arhats. How did they create, since the Lords of Wisdom are identical with the Hindu devas who refuse to create? Clearly, they are the Kumaras of the Hindu pantheon and Puranas, those elder sons of Brahma. Sanandana and the other sons of the Vedas, who, previously created by him, without desire or passion, remained chaste, full of holy wisdom, and undesirous of progeny. Footnote. See Vishnu Purana. The next one is also a reference, and we will skip it. The power by which they were first created is just that which has since caused them to be degraded from their high status to the position of evil spirits, of Satan and his host, created in their turn by the unclean fancy of esoteric creeds. It was by Kriya Sakti, that mysterious and divine power latent in the will of every man, and which, if not called to life, quickened and developed by yogi training, remains dormant in 999,999 men out of a million, and gets atrophied. The power is explained in the 12 signs of the zodiac as follows. B. Kriya Sakti, the mysterious power of thought, which enables it to produce external, perceptible, phenomenal results by its own inherent energy. The ancients held that any idea will manifest itself externally if one's attention and will is deeply concentrated upon it. Similarly, an intense volition will be followed by the desired result. A yogi generally performs his wonders by means of Sakti, willpower, and Kriya Sakti. The third race had thus created the so-called sons of will and yoga, or the ancestors, the spiritual forefathers, of all the subsequent and present arhats or mahatmas, in a truly immaculate way. They were, indeed, created, not begotten, as were their brethren of the fourth race, who were generated sexually after the separation of the sexes, the fall of man. For creation is but the result of will acting on phenomenal matter, the calling forth out of its primordial divine light and eternal life. They were the holy seed grain of the future saviors of humanity. Here we have to make again a break in order to explain certain difficult points, of which there are so many. It is almost impossible to avoid such interruptions, for explanations and a philosophical account of the nature of those beings which are now viewed as the evil and the rebellious spirits, the creators of Kriya Sakti. The reader is referred to the chapter on the fallen angels and the mystic dragons in part 2 of this volume. The order of the evolution of the human races stands thus in the 5th book of the commentaries and was already given. The first men were Kakayas, the second the sweat-born, the third the egg-born, and the holy fathers born of the power of Kriya Sakti. The fourth were the children of the Padmapani, Chandrasi. Of course, such primeval modes of procreation by the evolution of one's image through drops of perspiration, after that by yoga, and then by what people regard as magic, Kriya Sakti, are doomed beforehand to be regarded as fairy tales. Nevertheless, beginning with the first and ending with the last, there is really nothing miraculous in them, nor anything which could not be shown natural. This must be proven. 1. Kakaya birth, or that primeval mode of sexless procreation. The first race having oozed out, so to say, from the bodies of the Pitris, is hinted at in the cosmic allegory in the Puranas. Footnote. Vide Vishnu Purana. It is the It is the beautiful allegory and story of Sajna, the daughter of Vishwakarman, married to the sun, who, unable to endure the fervors of her lord, gave him her Kakaya, shadow, image, or astral body, while she herself repaired to the jungle to perform religious devotions, or tapas. The sun, supposing the Kakaya to be his wife, begat by her children, like Adam with Lilith, an ethereal shadow also, as in the legend, although an actual living female monster millions of years ago. But, perhaps, this instance proves very little except the exuberant fancy of the Puranic authors. We have another proof ready. If the materialized forms, which are sometimes seen oozing out of the bodies of certain mediums, could, instead of vanishing, be fixed and made solid, the creation of the first race would become quite comprehensible. This kind of procreation cannot fail to be suggestive to the student. Neither the mystery nor the impossibility of such a mode is certainly any greater. While it is While it is far more comprehensible to the mind of the true metaphysical thinker than the mystery of the conception of the fetus, its gestation and birth as a child, as we know it. Now to the curious and little understood corroboration in the Puranas about the sweat-born. 2. Kandu is a sage and a yogi, eminent in holy wisdom and pious austerities, which, finally, awaken the jealousy of the gods, who are represented in the Hindu scriptures as being in never-ending strife with the ascetics. Indra, the king of the gods, footnote 2. In the oldest manuscript of Vishnu Purana, in the possession of an initiate in southern India, the god is not Indra, but Kama, the god of love and desire. See text further on. Indra, the king of the gods, finally sends one of his female apsarasas to tempt the sage. This is no worse than Jehovah sending Sarah, Abraham's wife, to tempt Pharaoh. Jehovah did not do that. Abraham did that. We talked about that before. Abraham was a horrible fucking human being with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And this is one of the things that he did indeed do twice. And if that is confusing to you, the Unconventional Bible Study. But in truth, it is those gods, and God, who are ever trying to disturb ascetics and thus make them lose the fruit of their austerities, who ought to be regarded as tempting demons. Instead of applying the term to the Rudras, Kumaras, and Asuras, whose great sanctity and chastity seem a standing reproach to Danwanic gods of the pantheon. But it is the reverse that we find in all the Puranic allegories, and not without good esoteric reason. The king of the gods, or Indra, sends a beautiful Apsarasas nymph named Pramloka to seduce Kandu and disturb his penance. She succeeds in her unholy purpose, and 907 years, 6 months, and 3 days, footnote, These are the exoteric figures given in a purposely reversed and distorted way, being the figure of the duration of the cycle between the first and second human race. All Orientalists to the contrary, there is not a word in any of the Puranas that has not a very special esoteric meaning. Spent in her company seems to the sage as one day. When this psychological or hypnotic state ends, the Muni curses bitterly the creature who seduced him, thus disturbing his devotions. "Depart, begone," he cries, "vile bundle of illusions." And Pramloka, terrified, flies away, wiping the perspiration from her body with the leaves of the tree, and she passes through the air. She went from tree to tree, and as with the dusky shoots that crown their summits, she dried her limbs. The child she had conceived by the rishi came forth from the pores of her skin in drops of perspiration. The trees received the living dews, and the winds collected them into one mass. "This," said Soma, the moon, "I matured by my rays, and gradually it increased in size till the exhalation that had rested on the treetops became the lovely girl named Marisha." Footnote 2. Vishnu Purana, Book 1, Chapter 15, also Vivian's Temptation of Merlin, Tennyson, the same legend in Irish tradition. Now, Kandu stands here for the first race. He is a son of the Pitras, hence one devoid of mind, which is hinted at by his being unable to discern a period of nearly 1,000 years from one day. Therefore, he is shown to be so easily deluded and blinded. Here is a variant of the allegory in Genesis of Adam, born an image of clay, into which the Lord God breathes the breath of life, but not of intellect and discrimination, which are developed only after he had tasted of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. In other words, when he has acquired the first development of mind, and had implanted in him manas, whose terrestrial aspect is of the earthy, though its highest faculties connected with spirit and the divine soul. Pramloka is the Hindu Lilith of the Aryan Adam, and Marisha, the daughter born of the perspiration from her pores, is the sweat-born, and stands as a symbol for the second race of mankind. As remarked in the footnote, Veda Supra, it is not Indra, who now figures in the Puranas, but Kamadeva, the god of love and desire, who sends Pramloka on earth. Logic, besides the esoteric doctrine, shows that it must be so, for Kama is the king and lord of the Apsarasas, of whom Pramloka is one, and therefore, when Kandu, in cursing her, exclaims, "Thou hast performed the office assigned by the monarch of the gods. Go," he must mean that by that monarch, Kama, and not Indra, to whom the Sarapas are not subservient. For Kama, again, is in the Rig Veda, the personification of that feeling which leads and propels to creation. He was the first movement that stirred the one, after its manifestation from the purely abstract principle, to create. Desire first arose in it, which was the primal germ of mind, and which sages, searching with their intellect, have discovered to be the bond which connects entity with non-entity. A hymn in the Arthava Veda exalts Kama into a supreme god and creator and says, "Kama was born the first, him neither god nor fathers, Batara, nor men have equaled." The Atharva Veda identifies him with Agni, but makes him superior to that god. The Tyattariya Brahmana makes him allegorically the son of Dharma, moral, religious duty, piety, and justice, and of Starata, faith. Elsewhere, Kama is born from the heart of Brahma, therefore he is Atma Bu, self-existent, and Aja, the unborn. His His sending Promloka has a deep philosophical meaning. Sent by Indra, the narrative has none. As Eros was connected in early Greek mythology with the world's creation, and only afterwards became the sexual Cupid, so was Kama in his original Vedic character, Harivansa making him a son of Lakshmi, who is Venus. The allegory, as said, shows the psychic element developing the physiological before the birth of Daksha, the progenitor of real physical men, made to be born from Marisha, and before whose time living beings and men were procreated by the will, by sight, by touch, and by yoga, as will be shown. This, then, is the allegory built on the mode of procreation of the second, or sweat-born, the same for the third race in its final development. Marisha, through the exertions of Soma, the moon, is taken to wife by the Prakestas, the production of the mind-born sons of Brahma also. Footnote. The text has, from Brahma were born mind-engendered progeny, with forms and faculties derived from his corporeal nature, embodied spirits produced from the limbs, Gatra, of Daimat, all-wise deity. These beings were the abode of the three qualities of Devasarga, divine creation, which, as the fivefold creation, is devoid of clearness of perception, without reflection, dull of nature. But as they did not multiply themselves, Brahma created other mind-born sons like himself, namely the Brahma Rishis, or the Prajapati. 10 and 7. Sanandana and the other sons of Vedas, Brahma, were previously created, but as shown elsewhere, they were without desire or passion, inspired by holy wisdom, estranged from the universe, and undesirous of progeny. These Sanandana and the other Kumaras are then the gods, who, after refusing to create progeny, are forced to incarnate in senseless men. The reader must pardon unavoidable repetitions in view of the great number of the facts given. Production of the mind-born sons of Brahma also, from whom they beget the patriarch Daksha, a son of Brahma, also, in a former kalpa or life, explain and add the Puranas in order to mislead, yet speaking the truth. 3. The early third race, then, is formed from drops of sweat, which, after many a transformation, grow into human bodies. This is not more difficult to imagine or realize than the growth of the fetus from an imperceptible germ, which fetus develops into a child and then into a strong, heavy man. But this race again changes its mode of procreation according to the commentaries. It is said to have emanated avis formativia, which changed the drops of perspiration into greater drops, which grew, expanded, and became ovoid bodies, huge eggs. In these, the human fetus gestated for several years. In the Puranas, Marisha, the daughter of Kandu the sage, becomes the wife of the Prakitasasas and the mother of Daksha. Now, Daksha is the father of the first human-like progenitors, having been born in this way. He is mentioned later on. The evolution of man, the microcosm, is analogous to that of the universe, the macrocosm. His evolution stands between that of the latter and that of the animal, for which man, in his turn, is a macrocosm. Then the race becomes 4, the androgyne or hermaphrodite. This process of man-bearing explains perhaps why Aristophanes, footnote, see Plato's Banquet, why Aristophanes describes the nature of the old race as androgynous, the form of every individual being rounded, having the back and sides as in a circle, whose manner of running was circular, terrible in force and strength, and with prodigious ambition. Therefore, to make them weaker, Zeus divided them, in the third root race, into two, and Apollo, the sun, under his direction closed up the skin. The Madagascans, the island belonging to Lemuria, have a tradition about the first man, who lived at first without eating, and, having indulged in food, a swelling appeared in his leg. This bursting, there emerged from it a female, who became the mother of their race. Truly, we have our sciences of heterogenesis and parthenogenesis, showing that the field is yet open. The polyps produce their offspring from themselves, like the buds and ramifications of a tree. Why not the primitive human polyp? The very interesting polyp Storidium passes alternately from gemation into the sex method of reproduction. Curiously enough, though it grows merely as a polyp on a stalk, it produces gemmules, which ultimately develop into a sea nettle or medusa. The medusa is utterly dissimilar with its parent organism, the Storidium. It also reproduces itself differently by sexual method, and from the resulting eggs, Storidia once more put in an appearance. This striking fact may assist many to understand that a form may be evolved, as in the sexual Lemurians, from hermaphrodite parentage, quite unlike its immediate progenitors. It is, moreover, unquestionable that in the case of human incarnations the law of karma, racial or individual, overrides the subordinate tendencies of heredity, its servant. The meaning of the last sentence in the above-quoted commentary on stanza 27, namely, that the fourth race were the children of Padamapani, may find its explanation in a certain letter from the inspirer of Esoteric Buddhism, quoted on page 68. The majority of mankind belongs to the seventh sub-race of the fourth root race, the above-mentioned Chinamen and their offshoots and branchlets, Malayans, Mongolians, Tibetans, Hungarians, Finns, and even the Eskimo, are all remnants of this last offshoot. Padmanabhani, or Avalokiteshvara in Sanskrit, is, in Tibetan, Chenresi. Now, Avalokiteshvara is the great Logos in its higher aspect and in the divine regions. But in the manifested planes, he is, like Daksha, the progenitor, in a spiritual sense, of men. Padmanabhani Avalokiteshvara is called esoterically Bodhisattva, or Dayan Kohan, Chenresi Vanchuk, the powerful and all-seeing. He is considered now as the greatest protector of Asia in general, and of Tibet in particular. In order to guide the Tibetans and Lamas in holiness, and preserve the great Arhats in the world, this heavenly being is credited with manifesting himself from age to age in human form. A popular legend has it that whenever faith begins to die out in the world, Padmanabhani Chenresi, the lotus-bearer, emits a brilliant ray of light, and forthwith incarnates himself in one of the two great lamas, the Dali and Teshu lamas. Finally, it is believed that he will incarnate as the most perfect Buddha in Tibet, instead of in India, where his predecessors, the great Rishis and Manus, had appeared in the beginning of our race and now appear no longer. Even the exoteric appearance of Dhyani Chenresi is suggestive of the esoteric teaching. He is, evidently, like Daksha, the synthesis of all the preceding races and the progenitor of all the human races after the third, the first complete one, and thus is represented as the culmination of the four primeval races in his 11-faced form. It is a column built in 4 rows, each series having 3 faces or heads of different complexions, the 3 faces for each race being typical of its 3 fundamental physiological transformations. The first is white, moon-colored. The second is yellow. The third, red-brown. The fourth, in which are only two faces. The third face being left a blank. A reference to the untimely end of the Atlanteans is brown-black. Padmapani, Daksha, is seated on the column and forms the apex. In this reference, compare stanza 39. The Dayan Kohan is represented with 4 arms, another allusion to the 4 races. For while 2 are folded, the third hand holds a lotus, Padmanpani, the lotus bearer. This flower symbolizing generation, and the fourth holds a serpent, emblem of the wisdom and his power. On his neck is a rosary, and on his head the sign of water, matter, deluge. While on his brow rests the third eye, Siva's eye, that of spiritual insight. His name is Protector of Tibet, Savior of humanity. On other occasions, when he has only 2 arms, he is Chinresi, the Dhyani, and Bodhisattva, Chagna Padmak Karpo, he who holds a lotus. His other name is Chantong, he of the 1,000 eyes. When he is endowed with 1,000 arms and hands, on the palm of each of which is represented an eye of wisdom, these arms radiating from his body like a forest of rays. Another of his names is Lokapati and Lokanatha, Sanskrit, Lord of the World, and Jigten Gampo, Tibetan, protector and savior against evil of any kind. Padmanpani, however, is the lotus bearer symbolically only for the profane. Esoterically, it means the supporter of the kalpas, the last of which, the present Mahakalpa, the Varaha, is called Padma, and represents 1/2 of the life of Brahma. Though a minor kalpa, it is called Maha, great, because it comprises the age in which Brahma sprang from a lotus. Theoretically, the kalpas are infinite, but practically they are divided and subdivided in space and time. Each division, down to the smallest, having its own Dhyani as a patron or regent. Padmapani, Avalokiteshvara, becomes, in China, in his female aspect, Kuan Yin, who assumes any form at pleasure in order to save mankind. The knowledge of these astrological aspects of the constellations on the respective birthdays of these Dhyanis, Amitabha, the Omi Fotofo of China, included in e.g. on the 19th day of the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the 11th month, and on the 7th day of the 3rd month, etc., etc., gives the occultist the greatest facilities for performing what are called magic feats. The future of an individual is seen, with all its coming events marshaled in order, in a magic mirror placed under the ray of certain constellations. But beware of the reverse of the metal, sorcery. Sorry. And that is going to bring us to the end of From the Semi-Divine down to the First Human Races. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to some somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. You don't have to follow these particular rituals or dates in order to perform magic. That is a very important thing to understand. I talk about performing magic quite extensively in the Infinite Integrations playlist, and none of that is a requirement. There's not a whole lot for me to add here other than what I just said, which was the wrap-up for her section, right? If you do these things on this particular day, it will hold more power is patently untrue. At least in my experience, there has not been a singular day in which working magic has been more effective than any other day. All of them have been equally effective. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that was stated, drop it in the comments down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the box down below as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks or even a membership. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.